This is Curious Incident, a podcast for special needs families and your window into the world of special education. Special needs parenting can be challenging, and we want to make it easier by providing you with the resources you need to help your child. Let's delve deep into the world of learning differently with your host, special education attorney Adam Dayan.
I'm excited to present my next guest on the Curious Incident podcast, Randall Klein. Randall is an education strategist specializing in curriculum development, innovative pedagogy, and holistic coaching to improve student outcomes. She builds high-performing teams and fosters student-centered environments through training, process improvements, professional development, and strategic partnerships. Randall identifies root causes of behaviors affecting student self-esteem and success, integrating universal design learning, inquiry-based education, and executive functioning into discussions. A skilled coach and speaker, she leads sessions on learning differences, maximizing student engagement, and integrating executive functioning into classroom instruction, providing actionable strategies to improve the student experience. Randall, it's great to have you here.
It's so great to be here. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I think you encompassed almost everything that I care about and do. So thank you so much.
Of course. It's a great background you have.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here and discuss all those things that you kind of mentioned on the onset of the different areas that I've been in education and working with kids.
Amazing. So let's dive in.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about your background and your role as Director of Educational Services at PALS, which stands for Pediatric Assessment and Learning Support?
Sure. So my experience started as a special education teacher. I started working with middle and high school students, and I was in the classroom for about a decade. And then I had the opportunity to leave the public school setting and go into the admin world as a private school administrator. So I've kind of seen both sides of being in the classroom as a teacher and being an administrator as well. And it was through that I had the opportunity to get trained in some of the, I would say, less classic things that you get as a teacher, such as executive functioning and social emotional learning. And I fell in love, and I thought, wow, this is something that I wish I knew more about when I was teaching. And I feel like teachers, parents, and really students should know more about. So I had the opportunity to kind of use those skills and bring it into PALS. And now I get to oversee program and development so that we're thinking about this whole child approach, thinking about how they learn from an executive functioning standpoint, social, emotional learning, and also not make it just about the academics, which I think in large part is what we think about when we think about students and the learning process. Yeah, so kind of had many different lives, but all around kind of developing and working on students from a strengths-based perspective, I'd say.
Okay. How would you describe your philosophy when it comes to supporting children who learn differently?
So that's a great question. So I kind of think of it in three categories, if you will. So I think the first thing is that I always think every student can succeed when given the right tools, time, and trust. I almost say like the 3 T's, if you will. So if they're given the right tools to be successful and understand how they learn, then I think every student can thrive. Given the right time is important because we all take a different process in order to really understand what we're learning and then express what we're learning. And then trust is big, and it's twofold. It's students trusting themselves to want to learn new things, and then also trusting those that are teaching them to understand how they learn. So that's a big piece of it. The other thing I think about is this, I mentioned earlier, this whole child approach. So it's really about, it's not just about academics, it's thinking about the developmental continuum and thinking how students show up socially, how are they doing emotionally, and really understanding that how they learn is key to helping them feel successful. And then the other thing I think about is the importance of students feeling empowered and understanding how they learn best. So it's, parents, educators will always be responsible for teaching, but if a student is relying on that, it's going to be really hard for them to transfer how they learn outside the classroom, which ultimately is the goal in education. So really just thinking of the whole child and giving them the tools they need to be successful.
I just wanted to underscore what you said about trust. I was talking to a client yesterday who said that her daughter is really struggling in the school where she is, and she doesn't feel like her teachers understand her. Right. So this is a huge component, to believe that the people who are educating you as a child know your strengths and weaknesses and can educate you properly.
Yes.
And the other piece of the trust component, trusting yourself and understanding how you learn best, what are your strengths and weaknesses, how can you manage your own challenges, that's all huge.
Right. Yes, I'm happy you said that, because I think that, what I talk about often when understanding students' learning differences is there's this, I think, misunderstanding, because we only often see the behavior. And especially as, as a parent, but also as a teacher, we see the behaviors, and we don't often recognize that behaviors are just a means of communication and really are underlining potentially a lagging skill. And so just for an example, I'm thinking of, what you just said with that student in the classroom. As a teacher, and again, I taught for well over a decade, if I didn't know better and I saw students with their head down, and I might say, oh my God, they're being rude, or they're being lazy, or I see papers all over and I say, oh my God, they're super disorganized, they don't really care, or they're just doodling, and I think, oh, maybe, they're just being messy, or why aren't they doing the work that's asked? Again, I'm commenting on the behavior, and that might change how I interact with the student as a teacher, right? I might feel, or even as a parent, I might feel frustrated. I might feel annoyed. And that would often then be internalized by a student, right? They're on the receiving end. So they're hearing these comments like, why aren't you working? Or, why are you so messy? Or how did you forget that? I just gave the instructions. And so what happens is the student then internalizes that, and they start to build an identity around that. And they might think, oh, wow, maybe something is wrong with me. Or maybe am I stupid? Am I, and they start to develop this learned helplessness in a way where they might not even want to attempt the work because they're so used to feeling overwhelmed by it. And so all this is to say, the behaviors that we're seeing is really a lagging skill. So just to go back to those examples, a student with their head down, they might feel super overwhelmed, or they might not understand the directions, and they're too embarrassed to ask for it to be explained. So rather than be the only one in the classroom that doesn't know what to do, they're just going to put their head down, because that might even look a little less obvious, or simply just because they're drained and they're exhausted. Or a student that struggles with their working memory might quite literally not remember what was being asked, and so they feel embarrassed or silly. And so a teacher, I think this trust, going back to the point you added, is so important, because if a student trusts that the teacher understands this behavior is not intentional, I don't want to be defiant, I don't want to be rude, I just don't really understand what to do, I don't remember the directions, I don't understand the word and the question, it can really change the way, the student's learning trajectory unfolds. So trust is really huge, trusting who's teaching you, trusting yourself, and wanting to take risks and ask questions. So I know that was kind of a long-winded way to say it, but I see it a lot and I hear it a lot.
So helpful.
Yeah.
Randall, what exactly is executive functioning, and why is it so critical to a child's success both in and out of the classroom?
Great question. So executive functioning is the brain's self-management system, and it does skills like organization, managing your time, understanding how to plan and prioritize, and also emotional regulation. And so these are skills essentially, in the simplest way I think about it, is it's how we decide what task we want to accomplish and then how we're actually going to accomplish that task. And so if you think about these skills for students in a classroom, if you struggle with your memory or your attention, it's really difficult to understand what's expected of you and also learn and remember what you're learning, and therefore how you perform is going to be impacted. So, the smartest child can really struggle to succeed if they struggle with their executive functioning. So again, just some other examples. If you think about in the classroom, attention is one of the biggest parts and one of the biggest components of executive functioning. And if you struggle with attention, it's really easy to miss content that's being delivered, directions that's being asked of you, and therefore what a student actually, what they're able to show in terms of their learning, whether it's in homework, on a quiz, on a test, in a discussion, they often will struggle with that because they were struggling with attention. But then also you see this outside the classroom in the home. Parents, right? You might see your student, your child rather, and think, well, they're struggling to get the homework done because they're not managing their time properly, and they're on video games instead of doing the reading. And also, maybe their room is a mess and you're thinking, why are they so disorganized? And really it's just maybe an executive functioning skill that they're struggling with. And then, just to think about it even today, as adults, we're always using these skills. So for you and I, we had to figure out a date. We had to plan for it. We had to prioritize what questions we wanted to think about and discuss. I had to think about which train to take and plan backwards and manage my time to get here on time. So these skills are skills that transcend the child's journey, and they're things that we use every day for the rest of our lives.
And anxiety is a big part of this conversation, isn't it? Because if a person is feeling anxious, their executive functioning is impaired.
Absolutely. So, and then I'm glad you mentioned that, because that goes back to what I said earlier about that whole child approach, thinking about students' social and emotional, where they are socially and emotionally. So a student that has anxiety, their brain might be so focused about things outside the classroom or even in the classroom that they're worrying about. And if you think of a brain focusing on something outside the classroom, what they have to do later, that anxiety is quite literally closing the brain off to be able to take in new information. And so if you're worrying about what you do after school, or what you're wearing, or what you are going to eat for lunch, or what your friends are saying about you, it's really difficult to take in new information and actually hold on to it. And so that's where working memory comes in as well, right? If we're really anxious and someone's talking to us, the chances are we're not really listening or able to take in what they're saying. And that can cause more anxiety, right? So it's kind of this cycle, if you will. So it's really important to think about that as well.
Why am I missing what that person is saying? I only got 10% of what they just told me, and then
Right.
You're missing more and more.
Yeah. And then, something that is another piece of this is the social anxiety that comes around peers and in the classroom, thinking about you're not always, but often as you get older, especially, you start to compare yourselves to peers in the classroom. And so if you see students, oh, wait, they're already on the second page and I'm still on question number 2. I think that happened to me, if I'm being honest. I'm thinking about me as a kid. I always remember in math, I even remember the teacher, it's funny what you remember. It was Mr. Fisher's class. And I was a slow processor and math didn't come so naturally to me. And we'd have these quizzes and I'd see students racing through and they were almost done and I was still on question 3. And my anxiety was so palpable that I almost, I want to say blacked out, but I forgot the steps I needed to even get the math done. And that happens so often with students. They're really comparing with others. They're comparing themselves to just their own, how they're functioning, right? And oh my God, now the grades are impacted. So it's really kind of never ending in that I would say that anxiety loop, if you will.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
I had my own anxiety as a kid, and for me, OCD was a crutch. And so going through these checklists mentally to try to manage those feelings, and then you just get distracted from what's being taught in the class or the assignment at hand.
Totally. And so much of that happens on a daily basis with students that, also ADHD. When you have ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, you do have executive dysfunction. All these skills are impacted, quite literally. So when a teacher is talking and you might be attending to something else, you might be looking out the window, you might be thinking of soccer practice, right? Or anxious and worried about what has to happen later in the day, you're going to be missing the instructions, and then that could impact how the teacher reacts to you, right? They may, again, going back to what I said earlier, they might be annoyed or frustrated, and then suddenly now you don't even want to go to math class because that teacher's always yelling at you because that's the class that you tend to feel anxious in and you're worried. And so, again, I feel like it always comes full circle in that sense.
How do executive functioning challenges show up in everyday life, and how might that be mistaken for something else? You may have touched on this a little bit already, but if there's anything you want to add.
Absolutely. I think it does go back to what I said earlier in the sense of just us looking at behaviors and not necessarily recognizing that the behavior is a manifestation of a lagging skill, if you will. So when children are demonstrating things that seem like lack of motivation or lethargy or defiance, we as educators, as parents, as adults might assume that this is intentional, this is a choice. And in actuality, students really want to do well. Kids want to impress their parents. They want to impress their peers. And so I think really understanding that it's not, the behaviors we're seeing are not a choice. It's really something under the surface is going on. And so that quote unquote laziness might really be overwhelm. There are so many steps to this essay. I don't even know how to start. I don't want to start, right? Or this question is so dense and I don't even understand some of the words in the question. So I'm just going to put my head down because that feels a little easier. So I think a lot of it is wanting to really get curious. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, hopefully later on, because I think curiosity could be one of the most instrumental tools adults can use to really get at the core of what's going on.
Do you want to just go there right now? It is the name of this podcast.
Yes. Oh my God. I love that. That's such a full circle moment. It's so true. So yeah, I mean, one of the things I always talk about when I give professional developments to teachers or when I speak with parents, always encouraging them to get curious about the behaviors they're seeing. So, and also being intentional about the questions they're asking. So instead of just, saying and feeling frustrated, why didn't you do your homework? How did you forget to bring in your cleats for soccer practice? I don't know. I'm thinking of different examples, right? And stopping and saying, what's your process? How are you going to remember to bring all this stuff tomorrow? Or I notice it's hard to remember where to put your homework. How are you going to organize that? What's your system? Do you have one? Is it working? Should we come up with a different system? And getting super curious, first of all, even just as I say it, it relieves the tension of pointing a finger versus let's figure this out together. And so coming from a place of curiosity also in the classroom as an educator, right? Why did you only write one sentence when we said to write 3 paragraphs, or why are you running around the room? You should be in your seat. Okay. Is there something, do you need a brain break? Is your brain a little exhausted? Do you need movement? And really asking what's going on, it opens the doors to such amazing conversations. And then students really understanding more about themselves, which to me is the end goal. students understanding themselves as learner is the most important thing.
So you just said it. This is all about understanding. And I want to ask, why do you think learning differences are still so misunderstood even today?
It's a really important question. And I think one of the biggest things is a lot of learning disabilities are invisible to the eye. And so, for example, going back to executive functioning, these skills we talked about, our memory, our attention, our ability to manage time and organize, they're not necessarily things that you see and you understand. They're behaviors that are going on inside in the brain and how we're understanding what we're learning and then showing what we're learning. And so all we see are behaviors. We don't see what's going on inside the brain. And everyone, including the two of us sitting here, we both learn differently. Probably, I don't know about that, right? But for example, I'm a very visual learner, and some adults that I work with, they love to read everything. And so I think by and large, we tend to equate intelligence with performance. And really, it's about understanding everyone can learn. It's just how do they learn? How do they access the information? And then how do they share what they understand? And I think this kind of cycle, if you will, which I mentioned earlier, right? There is a learning disability. The student is therefore struggling in some aspect because of a lagging skill that they really need strategies and support for, then shows up as a behavior in the classroom, which then can lead to a response from an adult or a teacher, which then can be internalized by the student, and the cycle repeats. And sometimes I hear, oh, my student's in 10th grade and they're still reading at a 5th grade level. Why is that? And a lot of it is because we're understanding learning disabilities as just behavior and not really the lagging skill and what's going on behind the surface, if you will. So yeah, I think the challenges are often invisible and inconsistent. And so it can lead to confusion of what's really going on.
I think we were probably going to get to this later, but I want to bring it up now. I think it's a natural segue. You told me something in our previous conversations that has been in my head since you told me, which is instead of asking, how smart are you? Instead, ask, how are you smart? And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up, because I think, again, it goes to the art of questioning, and something as simple as shifting the way you ask students, or children rather, how are they smart versus how smart are they? It changes the understanding that being smart is one-dimensional and that intelligence is fixed. And you and I both know there's multiple means of intelligence. There's so many different ways to be smart. And I would argue that academics, I'm worried to say this because I don't want to get backlash in saying this, it's super important, of course, but I really believe the other skills, the soft skills, the executive functioning, the social emotional skills, these are the skills that really help you in the real world long term, right? So when you think about, a parent perhaps asking a student, how did you do on that test versus how did it feel to answer those questions? And let me rephrase that. When you're a parent that potentially asks, how did you do on that test? You're looking often for an answer of a grade, right? I got an A or I got an 87. And then the conversation becomes about that versus how did you get there, right? Why do you think you didn't do as well as you wanted? Or what would you do different next time? Because maybe the way you studied, maybe you reread your notes over and over, and that's not really how your brain remembers things. Maybe you need to make flashcards. Maybe we need to make pictures. Maybe we need to think of acronyms. And this is where strategies come in and are so important because they allow students to show their stroke of genius, if you will, in other ways. And another part of that is, how are you smart opens, even when I say it, I'm thinking of all these different ways I can answer that versus just thinking of smart in the sense of academics and performance and grades.
It just shifts the whole perspective. In school, there's different classes, the smart kid class, and when I was in school, they used to call it the dumb kid class, and it's just tiered in such a way that kids are primed to look for an answer to the question of, am I smart or not? And when you present it the way you did, which I think is brilliant, it forces the individual to find the way in which they are smart. It's just a given that they are smart, but we have to figure out in what way.
Yes. I love how you said it's a given that they are smart. That's the biggest thing I would hope that shifts in education and in just the way students think about learning and about themselves. Everyone is smart in some way. And if you think about it, that's what makes the world go round, right? You know, as an attorney, there's a certain level of skills that you need to be successful in that role that maybe I don't have, but I have a different skill set that helps me work with students in a certain way. So, you know, skills transcend the content, if you will, right? So I think it's so important for educators and parents and anyone really interacting with kids to ask the question in ways that expand their minds and their thinking and get them excited, right? I'm really good at making kids laugh. My strength is my social skills, and oh my God, how important is that, right? In today's day and age, that might even surpass some of the other skills that when we were growing up felt the most important, like rote memory and things of that nature.
I want to underscore that point because if you have someone who's brilliant and they get into the work world and they're struggling with anxiety or depression or the like, that could sabotage or interfere with all of their brilliance. Whereas if you have an individual who is resilient, they're going to figure out how to do the job in some form or fashion. I'm not worried about that person.
Yes. I'm smiling because you are speaking my language so perfectly in the sense that these, again, I'm going to say soft skills, if you will, or the skills that are not necessarily content academic based, such as having resilience or grit, are skills that transcend the classroom and childhood, and we need them for lifelong learning. And so even if I tend to give the example of
your use of soft and is interesting, and I've always heard it characterized that way. And maybe we need to shift how we refer to those things because the things we're calling soft are actually kind of hard.
Thank you for that correction, if you will. And actually, I will say that I've heard it referred to in both ways. And you're giving me food for thought because actually I think I might shift how I do say it because you're right. Not only are they hard, but they're hard in the sense of they're the most used skills. We need them every day to do everything, to remember, you know, even in this conversation, you can ask me a question and if I'm not paying attention or I'm not focused or I'm anxious and my mind is elsewhere, it's gonna change the conversation completely, and then it's gonna change how I feel about myself. And so again, it's like this full circle. I want to say cycle that we get into, where you know the hard skills. Sorry, see, I caught myself. These hard skills, I believe, are way more important in the long term. I know them to be more important because you need them throughout a lifetime. You need them. One example I give educators, I say, in order to go food shopping, how many executive functioning skills do you need? And right away, every educator, you know, they start to think of, okay, well, I need to have a plan because I need to know what I need to get. Do I need to get milk? Do I need to get eggs, right? you have to manage your time because, you don't want to end up browsing the aisles for hours when you have other things you have to get to. Your kid's home. You also have to have impulse control, right? You are on a healthy diet and you see a bag of chips and you want to grab those, but you have to have the impulse control not to. Every skill that we're talking about for executive functioning for students in learning in the classroom happens in everyday life with adults, but also with students, even for things that they're doing outside of skills, like for sports and being able to make friends, right? If you have impulse control issues and you're always blurting out what you're thinking, it might be difficult to make friends. And that's another whole topic, we didn't really get into yet, but these skills, these hard skills, also affect your ability to form connections and make friends.
I was just going to say, and this may get cut, and after this I'll get off my soapbox, but if we're trying to foster collaboration and shape individuals who know how to work with other people to get things done, being a brilliant individual is not really going to facilitate that, but having the social and emotional abilities to work as a team with other people will.
Absolutely. It's so important when we think about the skills that we're highlighting and emphasizing and encouraging while students are learning in the classroom. There are things like group assignments and group work, and thinking about how students are interacting and collaborating and working together really should transfer into after school, whether it's college or a job. It is true. And, you and I, I'm sure, know people as adults that were like, oh, working with that person's super difficult because they tend to maybe over talk or they don't share the space or the room. And that's a skill. It requires being able to pause and listen, and actually not just listen by looking, but understand what the other person's saying and not maybe spacing out and not really caring what they're saying. And also, I think the ability to connect is something that we take for granted. We think you have it or you don't. And we don't realize in some capacity, when students have more confidence, they're more likely to want to connect because they feel like they have something to share. They have something to say. If they're always feeling like they're told they're stupid or they're slow or these things, these behaviors that we see, they might be more, I would say, recluse or anxious, or they don't want to share because they feel stupid or embarrassed. But when we highlight the skills like being creative and problem solving, those are the skills that surpass the classroom and that we're doing every single day in our lives.
You said that so well.
Thanks.
While we were brainstorming about this episode, you mentioned using creative outlets like Lego and improv. Can you explain how these help children build executive functioning skills?
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that we're talking about this because these skills that we're talking about are not necessarily at the forefront of how students are learning today. And thinking about ways to integrate learning these skills where it's a little bit more low stakes and students want to engage is super transformative. So for example, these executive functioning skills we talked about, one of the things that we do at PALS, we have a group called Legoland, and it's something that we've brought to other schools such as Game Room. And it's really taking these things that are more low stakes and fun and thinking about how we're using these hard skills to address it. So if you think about Legos, right, you have to plan, what are we going to build? What are we going to make? You have to be flexible. Oh my God, I can't find this certain piece. What am I going to do now? Am I going to stop the whole thing? We can see a lot of students or kids want to just throw a tantrum if the thing breaks and maybe they built this whole Lego set and now they're missing a piece and suddenly they have a tantrum. Well, that's something that we can work on, but it's in a little bit more of a fun, low stakes way. So teaching them grit and problem solving and being flexible. Oh, you don't have this one piece. What can we use instead? Or working together as a group also. Maybe one student is building, a piece of the Lego whatever it's meant to be, right? They're building one piece of it while another student's working on something else and teaching them how to collaborate and ask questions. Oh, I feel like you're stuck with that. Do you need, you need to borrow this? So a lot of the skills like problem solving, being flexible, can be done through these more creative outlets that students will probably be a little bit more receptive to, right? And then similarly, improv to me, talk about a full circle moment. As you are aware, but I don't know if the listeners know, I have a background in entertainment and in comedy specifically. And what I love about that is, specifically improv, it's giving students the opportunity to learn how to have fun with their communication and be spontaneous in their thinking, and also have to regulate their emotions and really listen and take turns, but in a fun way where it's relaxed and we're not stressed. And you mentioned earlier, if you're anxious or you're depressed or something of that nature where you're struggling socially, emotionally, it's really hard to work on these skills. But if you're in an environment where that's the name of the game, right? Yes, and you might have said something wrong, but it's okay. Let's keep going with it. Or you have to wait your turn. We're playing this game. It's not quite your turn yet, and you accidentally speak. That's okay. How do we roll with it? These are the things that you need well into, later in life as adults and thereafter. So anything that helps students work on these skills where it's engaging is what will transform and I think have them last longer, if you will.
I'm just thinking about the part of what you said having to do with mistakes and building that muscle, that mistakes happen and we need to learn to roll with them.
Yes. And one of the things that actually, when I was observing one of the improv groups, I loved, they did this activity called failure bows. And I thought it was so brilliant. I'm like, imagine we did this in classrooms. And so what would happen is they teach you in the game, if you make a mistake or you do the wrong, quote unquote, wrong thing at the wrong time, you say, I made a mistake, and everyone claps and you take a bow. Can you, it's just, I sat there and I was smiling. I'm like, this is what a brilliant way to shift the feeling and the thought process of making a mistake. Oh, it's okay. And we're applauding it. And, it just, again, it lowers that anxiety of making a mistake. It's kind of funny and it's okay. And we can keep going. So I'm so glad you highlighted that because it's actually a game, failure bows.
I love that.
Right? I love that too. It made me so happy.
What are some simple, practical strategies you recommend for families or educators to start using right away?
So some practical strategies that families or educators can use right away. One of the first things I always say, one of the simplest things, is really using visuals and checklists. And the reason that's super helpful is it's targeting multiple skills. So when you have a checklist, you're helping students organize possibly an order of steps that they need to accomplish. You're also building that muscle memory of, okay, this is what I have to do first, and then I can't forget to do this, and you can actually check it off. So this can look like something such as a morning routine, right? And I mentioned the visuals because that depends on the student's age or how they learn or how they'll remember. So, for example, having a checklist like waking up and brushing your teeth, putting even the toothbrush and the toothpaste away. I mean, it might need to be broken down that's specifically getting dressed, not just packing your bag, but maybe even what goes into the bag, putting your folders away, putting your sneakers and gym clothes in the backpack. So if you have a checklist, it really helps build routines and it helps students remember what they have to do every single day. And what I love about it, and I find this as an adult because I still am using checklists, is there's a sense of accomplishment. When you get to check it off or you feel like you did it, you're like, oh, great, okay, I'm done. So checklists and visuals are one of the simplest ways to start. Another strategy that you can use right away, and it kind of has to go with checklists, I just started to mention it, is breaking tasks down. This goes back to that simple, the art of questioning, right? So instead of saying, for example, did you clean your room? What that can mean so many different things, right? A student will sometimes that starts an argument because they're like, yes, you did. And the parent might walk in and say, wait a minute, what? There's clothes everywhere. Well, to them, they clean the room because maybe they put just their sneakers in the right spot. So breaking tasks down, what do you really mean by that, right? And again, it kind of is synonymous with checklists, but break it and make it simple. Again, so did you clean your room? Are your shirts back in the drawers? Is your dirty clothes are in the hamper? Are your school belongings on the desk? So break it down and make it really straightforward. It's easier to help students understand what's expected, or kids rather. I keep saying students. It's the teacher in me. So checklist, breaking things down. Another thing, and I feel like this could be a fun thing for parents. Again, a mindset shift, if you will, which I'm always talking about, is practicing time estimation. This is huge. We didn't touch on it too much, but time management is one of the most, I say, very difficult skill in executive functioning. And it's something that I think we struggle with from kids all the way to adulthood, right? You know, there's that friend, I'm still sometimes late for dinner because I'm not managing my time right. So I think something that you can do to make it a little bit more fun is you can ask your child a question like, you know, how long do you think it's going to take us for us to cook dinner tonight? How long do you think it's going to take me to cook dinner tonight? Don't even put it on them, right? Or I have to clean up and you have to clean up. Like, how long do we think it's going to take? And so when you start to ask questions about simple things, you're starting to build students' awareness of how long things really take. And so you might say, how long is a shower going to take? You'd be surprised. That's a really tough question. You know, a student might be like, I don't know. Am I in there for 2 minutes? Am I in there for an hour? So building that self-awareness of time is huge. And I just want to say that's super important if you think about it for completing work, because a lot of students avoid getting started with homework or studying because in their mind, they estimate, oh, this is going to take me hours. I don't even want to do it. And then you sit with them and it takes them 5 minutes. And they're like, oh my God, why did I put that F? Or the opposite. They think it's going to take me 5 minutes. I'll get it done quickly. And then it's hours. And then you're like, oh my God, why are you working until midnight? Because the time estimation was off. So building questions around timing in low stakes way is huge. So yeah.
Maybe I have some executive functioning stuff, or maybe these strategies are just helpful for all people. But in adulthood, you have things, let's say a huge project that you're working on, and these skills become hugely important to be able to break it down into components. And especially if you're trying to meet deadlines, saying specifically, as you articulated, what is going to happen by when. And if it's amorphous, then you're not going to be able to measure progress. But if you can successfully break it down in the way you're describing, then you can actually track, did the thing that I said was going to get done actually get done?
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up, because quite honestly, it's something even, again, I as someone who does this for a living and knows it's inside and out, it's something I still work on in terms of managing my time and breaking down tasks. Sometimes, for example, I'm creating a professional development and in my mind, oh my God, that's so lofty. Where do I even start? So if I can kind of break it down in terms of what I want to accomplish, and I can appropriately estimate how long it'll take, it really, first of all, it eases my anxiety, which is huge, right? And it also makes me feel like I'm making progress towards that end goal. And that's what we talked about as executive functioning, right? Deciding the goal and figuring out how to get there. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. And the time estimation is so key, because often as adults, and again, I'm speaking to myself, sometimes I use time blocking, which is a strategy, you know, we could talk about, where you're setting a specific amount of time and making not just how long, but when, right? So I'm not going to say I'm going to work on it for an hour. I'm going to work on it from 10 to 11. That's what time blocking is. It's a really helpful strategy. And what I find myself noticing is sometimes I don't give myself enough time, and then I don't get it done because I only give myself an hour. And then I realize, oh, wow, now I know that this task actually does take me 2 hours. So when I'm doing it next time, I'm actually going to give myself 2 hours instead of an hour. And that's, again, that's the most important part. I'm thinking about my thinking and understanding how I operate. And that goes back to what I said in the beginning of the podcast, empowering children, empowering adults to understand how they learn and what they need to be successful.
Yeah, I think also giving ourselves some grace that it doesn't necessarily have to be done completely or perfectly the first time. If you said you're going to spend 60 minutes on a task and you spent the 60 minutes, but it didn't get done, great. You worked on it for an hour and now you can block out another hour.
Absolutely. I'm so happy you said that, because that is so crucial. That goes back again, and everything we're saying keeps coming full circle, because that's what this is. It goes back to almost the failure bow of it all, or reframing, again, the mindset shift of, instead of being hard on yourself, using it as a way to understand how you operate. And that's all we're doing, right? So we're just getting more familiar with how we learn and what we need to be successful. So if I give myself an hour and I realize it's taking me longer, instead of being hard on myself, I might say, oh, this is really good to know, because I'm definitely going to be doing more of these. And now I realize I need a little bit longer. Or maybe the flip side, maybe I can think about the process I use and I can think, wow, was the process I used the best? Maybe I didn't go about it the best way, and there's a better way for me to accomplish this task. And that's super important too. And that goes back to students when you think about studying, right? They give themselves an hour and they can't remember anything. Maybe the process they're using to study wasn't the best. And just that curiosity, getting curious and realizing, okay, I might need a different approach. And that's great.
I love this. These are great strategies. We can start helping our kids work these muscles from a young age. Are there any other strategies you want to mention?
I want to mention, you already said normalizing mistakes as part of the process, which is really big. And that is a strategy. It really is. It's normalizing mistakes and making them super okay and really learning points. But I'm going to go back to the art of questioning and coming from a place of curiosity. If there's one takeaway and one strategy and you feel maybe overwhelmed, I don't know how to make a checklist or how do I break this down? If you simply just think about getting more curious when you see behaviors that you might feel are not serving your child well, and you start to ask more questions, that is the biggest transformative way that you can change students in understanding themselves and build these executive functioning skills that are so important. So again, instead of saying something like, why haven't you started that homework? You can ask, what's your plan to start the homework? So it's really just getting curious about what you're observing versus telling what you're seeing.
And you often talk about the ABC approach. Can you break that down for us and share how it works in real life?
Absolutely. And, I came up with this in a way because in it of itself, it is using a strategy of acronyms. For me, my brain also, I struggle. I've had ADHD actually undiagnosed most of my childhood. I didn't really even realize it until I was an adult, which is probably why I'm so passionate about this. And I think
we have that in common, by the way, not the ADHD part, but not learning until adulthood.
Exactly. And that happens a lot. And we can kind of go into that whole, it's like another whole segment, if you will. It's kind of, it works until it doesn't. And in terms of how you operate, so compensatory skills, etc. But the reason I like ABCs is, even for me in my own brain, it helps me remember things simply, because I'm like, oh my God, there's so many strategies. How am I going to remember them all? Okay, ABC, let's keep it simple. So that is a strategy in and of itself. A to me is awareness. The first step in anything that we're doing is having an awareness of where we're at with whatever it is we're working on, whether it's a student or an adult. So really becoming aware of perhaps your stucks. Where am I with this learning task or this project? Where are my strengths also? And by the way, I want to highlight that. Don't think I talked about enough the importance of strength-based conversations and not always being about what's not working and really highlighting what's working, because that's huge. But so recognize awareness. Having an awareness, and always that goes back to getting curious. Awareness of your process, awareness of your stucks, awareness of your strengths. So having an awareness. Then the B is kind of going back to breaking things down. Simplifying tasks into concrete steps is one of the easiest, or I would say the most, the best way to really help a student digest what's expected of them and remember it, breaking things down. So again, I gave the example earlier with cleaning your room or getting ready for dinner. What does that really look like? It means washing your hands. It means putting your homework away, breaking things down. And then if you think about it in a classroom, let's say a student, I'm going back to being a middle school teacher, an essay is so daunting. Let's break those steps down, right? What are all the steps you need to do it? We need a topic. We need to collect evidence. We need to understand how to write a paragraph. So just breaking steps down is super helpful and important. And then the C, so the awareness piece, breaking things down. And then the C is how being consistent. And the reason this is so important is our brain loves consistency. It loves automaticity. Did I say that correctly? I think so. But the point is, our brain loves to not have to think about things. We do things automatically. It's the best. So, you're not thinking about how you're brushing your teeth. It's just a habit you're forming. The way we form new habits is through consistently doing certain tasks. And so if you're reminding your child consistently to do something, or for example, you're having maybe every Sunday you're having a conversation about what went really well for you this week, or what's something you want to do differently going into next week, and you consistently are having those conversations, that's where the transference happens, and that's where you're forming new habits. So becoming aware, breaking things down, and consistently working with your child to build these routines is what can truly shift and build their executive functioning skills.
We may have touched on this a little bit earlier. How do social and emotional needs tie into academic performance and self-esteem?
Yes, so we spoke briefly on this, and I think it's super important even to talk about it more and highlight how the social emotional needs tie into academic performance, because they're truly inseparable in my mind. But really, if you think about it, the way that we show up as adults, but I'll go back and start with students in the classroom. If we are really stressed about a fight that we had with our parents or our friends, or we can even go back to basic needs. We're hungry, we're tired, we didn't get enough sleep. Our brain is going to really struggle to learn new material, new content, because our brain is preoccupied with all these other things going on, and our emotions are charged. Yeah.
I just think of HALT. I know we've spoken about some acronyms. I don't know if you are familiar with that one. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. If you're feeling one of those things, you may be dysregulated and may not be able to focus on some stuff.
So glad you said that. Exactly. And it's something, again, as we're sitting here and talking, to me, I could imagine people being, oh yeah, well, that's obvious. But in real time, it's something that's really easily overlooked, because, and I can speak as a former, as an educator still, but when I was a classroom teacher, there are certain goals you really are meant to accomplish at the end of the day. And you get so worried about not accomplishing that you might overlook that a student, they're just simply so exhausted that they're not going to be receptive to anything. If you think about it, it's almost like when adults, if you're, with your partner and you're in an argument, right? And, some adults, like, they see red. They're not really even ready to listen to your, I'm thinking of a part, like, they're not even listening to what you're saying because they're so angry. And that's the same kind of thing that happens with students possibly when they're learning, is, again, not that they're necessarily angry, or maybe they are angry. Maybe they got in a fight with a teacher the period before, and now they're showing up in your classroom. And of course, they're still thinking about that argument they had, or they're still upset about the grade they got. And now they're supposed to show up in your classroom and totally get ready and be excited about learning new stuff. Not necessarily. So we really need to prioritize the social and emotional well-being of students, because that sets the foundation for learning. Truly, when students are relaxed, and this goes back to those 3 T's I said earlier, the tools, the time, the trust. When the students are relax and they feel supported and trusted, the brain quite literally opens up and it's ready to take in new content, new material. But when we're operating in, let's say, a fight or flight mode, which we talk about when it comes to anxiety, the brain's closed off and we're not ready to learn. And not only are we ready to learn, if we do learn, we most likely won't remember it because it's not getting stored into our brain. And so it's so important, and this goes back also to when you said my philosophy, the whole child approach, and really thinking about things from a developmental standpoint and all the aspects that go into making us humans, right? The social emotional piece is paramount, I think.
Mm-hmm. Can you speak to the tension many parents feel worrying about academic success when their child may be struggling emotionally or socially?
Yes, that's a super valid concern, and I never want to minimize, what it's like to be a parent and worry about that, because we are still in an age where things like your grades do matter and how you perform does matter. But it goes back to thinking about effort over outcome. And when you can prioritize getting curious with your child about the process and the effort they're putting into something, and I don't want to say effort and get it confused with are you trying hard, but how are you doing this? The process. That can change the tension or the worry because you're starting to understand your child and how they learn. So instead of feeling, again, that frustration of, oh my God, you didn't turn in your homework again, or you called out during class, you're getting in trouble all the time. Instead of doing the stress of that, if you can think about, I wonder, why are you calling out all the time? Or why did you get, why are you forgetting your materials every day? Why did you get a C? And having a conversation with them in a way that's super curious for both of you, what do you think it is? Is it hard to forget? And then brainstorming together, what can we do? So it just, even as I'm saying it to you, my tension is going down. Okay, you forgot your homework again. What are you doing now? And is it working? Oh, now you're just doing it and you're remembering it. Okay, so maybe we need to write it down. Let's start with that. And so I think, again, just honoring the process and the effort over the outcome can shift the tension that you feel when you think your child is not performing up to their potential.
You and I have spoken about when academic success is built on shame. I'm a fan of Brené Brown. She talks a lot about shame. Can you discuss how that fits in here?
I love that you brought that out. I'm a big fan as well. And if you don't know, we probably both highly recommend listening to some of that. Shame, just the thought of even that word makes me almost clench up and feel a little tightness in my chest. And it's the opposite of what we want to encourage, which is building confidence. That's how you want to try new things. That's how you want to learn. And so when goes back to when I mentioned earlier, highlighting strengths over struggles. If we keep highlighting strengths over struggles, we're truly wiring students' brains to think about the things they're doing well and not just what they're not doing well. And I learned this actually later on in life, and it's something I'm still working on. And it's thinking of, instead of always, I tend to be a worrier myself. I could be anxious myself. And so I've learned strategies instead of always thinking what's not going well, what can I be doing better? What is going well, and how can I leverage what's going well into other aspects of my life? Even what we're doing today, right? I'm an educator. I've been an entertainer. And so because I've built confidence and comfort, I'm like, great, let's do a podcast and talk about all these things. But had I been told or given feedback that maybe, I'm not so great at this, or I never do this well, I might be like, what? There's no way I can sit and talk on a podcast. So highlighting strengths over struggles is a really great way to build confidence and kind of minimize shame that students might feel when it comes to how they learn or how they perform.
Well put. You've said your work is about helping students become masters of their own minds. What does that look like in practice?
Yes, I'm smiling again because this to me is the number one takeaway that I would want to encourage educators, parents, and even if a student or a child or a young adult is listening. The best thing that you can do for yourself is understand how your brain works and understand how you learn and understand how you think. When you know yourself in that way, firstly, it's really hard to feel shame because you realize, oh, but that's just how my brain works. I don't have to be embarrassed about it. Personally, I don't have a great memory. So, if I were to get mad at myself every time I forgot, it would just cause a shame spiral and I would even be nervous to talk to people. But instead, if I can think of, oh, okay, well, I know that I don't have a great memory. What can I do differently? All right, maybe when I talk to someone, I have to visualize, what they're telling me, because that's a strategy to help me remember. Okay, cool. Now moving forward, I'm going to really try and use that. I'm going to really visualize, and it really helps me. Or, maybe visualizing doesn't work. And I think of acronyms, right? That was what I said earlier with the ABCs. So I think now I'm forgetting what the question was. See, is that not perfect?
That was right on cue.
That was almost planned. Let's pretend that was planned. This is what, see? Pointing, right? But here we go. I'm laughing at it, right? I'm not sitting here, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. I can't believe it. I'm going, wait, that's how I am.
It's perfect. And I credit you so much for the ease with which you say, I'm not so good at X. Why is that so hard for us to say sometimes? And we get stuck on that part. Oh, no, I'm not good at this thing. Whereas if we embraced, okay, I'm not so good at this thing, we can shift and start to think about, how can I leverage my strengths to be better at this thing that I'm not so great at?
Yes, it's something that I think I want to, again, I said earlier, the most important thing, this is a part of that, is first of all, demystifying what it means to have a learning disability or learn differently, because again, everyone learns in some way a little bit differently. We all have our strengths, we all have our weaknesses. Normalizing that we all struggle with different areas of our lives is, something that I wish happened more. I think it should happen more. And that's something that, going back to what parents can do, something I actually forgot to mention is modeling the thought process and sharing their struggles with their children. It's so helpful when you're like, oh my God, I have a project tomorrow and I waited till last minute. What do I do? Let your kid help you with that. When you do things like this and you model problems that you have and you model how to solve it and you involve them in the process, it takes away the shame and the fear of admitting that you're struggling with something.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It really helps so much. And it's something that, I do have no problem admitting, because I think we're all human and there's such a human aspect, and it doesn't change no matter whether you're a 3-year-old making a silly mistake or a 70-year-old making a silly mistake. We're all doing it all the time. So it shouldn't be stigmatized. It should be celebrated. And, and also then you can ask questions like, I might say, oh my God, I never remember. Do you have a good idea for me? How do you remember so well? I mean, I'm asking people all the time at work about what they're doing to manage their time well if I see it happening.
This may get cut. But I was just reading a progress report for one of my kids, and it comes as no surprise, knowing myself and knowing my wife, that my child is high achiever who also wants to do things perfectly, avoid mistakes, and gets overwhelmed in certain scenarios. And I think what you're saying right now is so important, and I want to take it a little bit further, just in terms of modeling it for our kids. And some of us are great at this. We've learned to accept mistakes and take risks, and some of us adults are still working on that, and some of us adults haven't started working on it at all, and it can feel very daunting. So can you talk a little bit more or give another example about how to model for our kids these skills that are so important to being a functional, thriving adult?
Yes, I am really glad that you're circling back to this, because like you mentioned, it is something that as a society, there is different levels to which we feel comfortable admitting our flaws, our faults, our struggles. And it is something, and I'm sure everyone listening can think of that one person who can never admit they were wrong, or the person who's always making jokes and kind of laughing at themselves in a way to be the bun of the what is that expression?
Butt of the joke.
Thank you. There you go. Oh my God. But, and so if you think about it, or going back to your question about how to model that, I think so much of it is sharing out loud your thought process. And some of us, I actually probably do too much. I'm always kind of thinking out loud, and I'm a very verbal processor, and it helps me versus, my colleague is the complete opposite and everything's internalized. And there's a balance, and no one has to be extreme one way or the other. That being said, sharing as an adult some of your stucks, and it could be on a daily basis. One example I give parents all the time is like going to the gym or wanting to, in this day and age, everyone's goals, right? In the year, be healthy, lose weight, be fit. And you kind of can talk about what your plan is to do that, right? If you say, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm only going to go once a week, great. How quickly is your body going to really change? I don't know. It depends. What else are you eating? What are you doing? Are you doing things on the other days of the week to kind of reach that goal versus someone who, if you're talking with your kid, and it's not even necessarily talking to your kid, but just thinking out loud about this example of wanting to be more fit, saying like, oh, I really want a sweet right now, but I'm really, my goal is to kind of be fit. What do you think I should do? What can I do instead? Oh, let's problem solve. Maybe I can have like a piece of fruit instead. Or, I have this goal and I really want to be healthy and I'm trying to go to the gym every day, but I'm really tired today. I don't feel like it. What do you think I should do? Should I skip it? Should I just not go? And if they say don't go, maybe talk to them. Wait, really? But then it's going to push away my goal, right? Or maybe if I just do 10 minutes, maybe that's better than nothing at all. And then they might be like, oh yeah, you know what, you're right. And so this dialogue, and that might be an off kind of example and maybe too personal for myself.
Yeah. It's perfect.
Yeah.
And it's right on point and resonating loudly with me at least.
Yeah. Right. Because we think about, because it's just something that, and I think like when you're having these conversations and also like, okay, you know what? Oh my God, I had that piece of cheesecake last night. Instead of spiraling on it to your child, maybe you say, is that so bad? What do I do? I'm so mad at myself. And listen to what they say. Maybe they're going to say, yeah, that's really bad. And then you talk about it. Is it? Okay, well, maybe what can I do differently tomorrow because I did that? What can I do tomorrow? Oh, maybe I'll run an extra mile, right? So these conversations are like, oh, okay, everything is not perfect and we all make mistakes and we all have goals. And getting there is tricky. It's not linear. And there's going to be highs and lows and dips. And so now if you're thinking about that with a kid, maybe they'll start to say, oh my God, I wanted to study, but I'm really also so tired. I don't feel like it. All right. Can you do 5 minutes and take it? Can you just do that? They've done that with you and maybe give that back. You told me to try. Or, oh my God, I failed that quiz or I didn't prepare well. All right. Well, that doesn't feel great. What do you want to do different next time? So these conversations, they unmask like what it's like to be human. And so giving just everyday examples to your kids and asking them, again, get curious, ask questions. Game changer, I think.
I'm just taking off my lawyer and host hat, and I'm putting on my parent hat, and this is so on point and so important, and I know it's going to be helpful to a lot of people.
I'm so happy. I'm glad.
What's the difference between tutoring and coaching, and how does coaching help students across all subjects rather than focusing on just one academic area?
So this is something that I often highlight. I say semantics matter when we're talking about the supports we're giving students. And let me start by saying there's nothing wrong with tutoring. Tutoring could be, it's really important. It's really helpful. The difference or the way that I distinguish it is, tutoring often can focus on subject specific. So it's like getting a tutor for math to help you with that content. And I personally, and this goes back to the first question you asked about my philosophy, is really whole child, holistic, and recognizing that if we're only tutoring in one subject, we're not really getting to the root of how the student learns. Why is that subject hard? What is it about math? Is it because there's multiple steps? And so coaching to me is, first of all, the connotation feels light and happy. And, if you think about kids, a lot of kids have coaches for sports teams or for singing. And there is this feeling of, okay, they're in my corner. They might push me a little bit. They might be hard on me, but I trust them, right? Going back to the trust. And so maybe I'll listen to what they have to say. So the first thing I should actually have said is the connotation of coaching to me feels a little bit more receptive and easier and engaging. And if a student doesn't want to engage, we've lost it, right? It's really hard to move the needle. But coaching, again, looks at how a student approaches learning. I said how twice intentionally. It's the process. It's how are we learning? So it's all those executive functioning skills I said, planning, prioritizing, managing your emotions. This holistic approach is something that will transcend any academic subject and lifelong learning. So just going back to, I know I had a really long explanation, but in the simplest term, when you're thinking of tutoring, it tends to be super specific, and the student is so kind of concerned or wanting to get better at that subject. And we're not necessarily getting to the root cause of why is that subject hard, right? So when we think of this English, that's a big thing that comes up, reading and writing. What is it about it? Is it because we struggle with working memory? And so when we're reading, we're forgetting. Great. Let's think of a strategy that you can use to help your working memory. And then you know what? Suddenly, when you're taking French or a different subject, that strategy can be used in a different classroom, right? So now when your brain feels full, you're doing a little stop and jot. Now when you're in history and your brain feels full, you'll do a stop and jot in science, right? So coaching thinks about the process and giving specific strategies for how we're learning versus just the content of what it is that we're trying to understand.
That's great. What kinds of conversations should parents be having with their child's educators to better support learning?
So the conversations that parents could have with their educators, I think, goes back again to thinking about equating intelligence with performance and shifting away from that a little bit more. And again, I keep highlighting the process and what we're observing. And so asking questions like, what do you notice when my child is learning well? Where do they tend to get stuck? These are questions that, and by the way, you can also ask your students, but it's not about the content, it's the experience of learning. So when you ask those questions to your child's teacher, first of all, it makes them to really have to think, right? Like, how do I know when, your child is well? Oh, they're smiling, they're raising their hand. What if they're not a student that raises their hand? How do you know if they're understanding it? So getting curious about that, and also, thinking about questions that are more open-ended and about the process, like, how are they completing assignments? Do they seem to be rushing through it? Why do you think they're rushing through it? And thinking about that over what they're producing, right? It's not about the product. It's not about what they're producing. It's how are they getting there? How are they understanding what they're learning and showing it, right? If your child really struggles with writing, but they're, we're going to say they're brilliant, right? They have a mind, they understand, they're analytical, they're critical. How does the teacher know, if they're only assessing them by their writing, how do they know what they really understand? Is there another way they're assessing their child learning? Is there other opportunities they can give your child to show what they're learning? Can they verbally explain it? Can they do something more creative? Because that's where they really shine. So you might even give educators opportunities to think of different ways that they can assess their students' understanding, and also, more importantly, instruct their students. So I'm just going to always just drive in that process over the product.
Along the same lines, I love what you've said about how parents can ask better questions to get to the heart of what their child is experiencing. So, and I struggle with this all the time. How do you, and I think a lot of parents do, how do you get a sense of what happened in your child's school day? Most of us will say, how was school? And we don't get very much in response. What are some more nuanced questions that parents can be asking to get a better understanding of their child's day?
Yeah, I'm so happy you asked this question. I feel like I've been smiling this whole time because I love talking about this so much. It's so important because, again, the mindset shift and the art of questioning, I'm going to continue to say it, is so important. And so when you ask questions like, how was school? We're giving, our child the opportunity to just give a one-word answer. It was good. It was bad. I don't know, right? Again, what if their memory's not that great, or they don't really want to share because they're embarrassed? So instead of asking these really kind of, I would say, open-ended questions about just how was school, being a little bit more directive and saying something like, what was something that was tricky today? Or did you have any, in any classes, did they teach anything that was really confusing? I'm curious, I want to know. Or the flip side of that, which I really do want to emphasize, and going back to strength bases, was, when did you feel proud of yourself today? And also, again, that could be, a student might roll their eyes. I didn't feel proud of myself. But okay, maybe what was something that you learned today that was something new that you didn't know? Or can you teach me or tell me something that you learned today that was interesting? And again, it depends. You have to really know your child, and some of these questions, pending how they are, and the age, you'll get an eye roll versus like really detailed information. But I think the more questions that you ask that require them to be reflective and actually think about their day, and the more pointed you can make the question, the more likely you'll get a more detailed response. So even when I said something tricky today, that might even be too open-ended. Maybe you have to say, I know you love math. Was there anything that stumped you in that class? Because you're so good at it. I know you love it. Did they tell you anything? Or the flip side is like, oh my God, I know English has been so like tricky. Is there anything that worked really well today that you liked? Or did the teacher teach anything in a way that you understood? Or, so asking questions that kind of gets them to want to share is a really great way to reframe it, and get them to be a little bit more expressive and reflective.
What are some ways parents can help their children become more independent and confident learners?
So there's many different ways that you can help your child. I think the first thing I always say, and it's, to me, I think it's one of the simplest things, but it's giving choices. And this is not just parents, this is educators as well. And just across the board, I mean, even as adults, we love having choices. But when you give your child the choice, again, it's empowering them, which we said is the most important. And it's more likely that they'll be receptive and want to kind of, or it'll help them decide what they should be doing and how they should do it, instead of it being something that they don't even know where to start. When you give choices, it grounds them. Okay, I could do this or I could do this, which is easier for me, which is more difficult for me. It helps give them options. Even, as simple as like, what do you want for dinner? Like, that's so open-ended. Oh my God, do you want this or this? Or, what do you want to sign up for after school? That could be really overwhelming, right? So thinking about giving them specific choices so it's not super overwhelming, but it helps contextualize and give them options to think about is helpful. I think another really important thing is we talk about grit, I said earlier, and perseverance. Something that is so important, and I see this happen all the time, is, it's hard to let our kids struggle. It's whether you're a teacher, whether you're a parent, whether, I have my niece I'm very, very close with, and sometimes I watch her struggle, and it's giving that kind of, I say, just enough. So the wiggle room to figure things out. You don't want them necessarily to get to meltdown mode. That being said, a little bit of struggle is important. If you're quick to jump in and problem solve for them, they're never going to have the opportunity to figure out for themselves. And that is a skill that they need for forever. So it's really important to kind of find that sweet spot where ask them, what do you think? Again, the art of questioning. Give a little struggle. A little struggle's good. And bring it back to yourself, right? If you can. I'm struggling. And the last two things I do really want to emphasize is, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I'm happy that I am, because it's celebrating the effort and not the outcome. I talked about the process, not the product. It's similar, right? Think about what are they doing to get to the end goal, and not just what was the end goal, right? Because some students, it's really upsetting if they feel like, oh my God, I'm working so hard. I studied forever and I still did poorly. If you just look at if we just talk about the outcome, then we're minimizing what it took to get there. And maybe for them, that 76 is a huge accomplishment, because really it should have been even less, because their working memory is really difficult. So really celebrating the effort. And the last thing, which I talked about earlier that I want to say again, is the modeling of positive self-talk and problem solving. So modeling, I said earlier, I gave those examples, but the positive self-talk is so important. And I almost think I didn't talk about that enough. I said strength-based, but I think we're so quick to talk about struggles and what's not going well. And so really out loud thinking about things that are going well for your student, or, I noticed you put your socks in the hamper. Like, I didn't even have to remind you. Like, how do you remember to do that? And just really building those kind of getting those little smiles, those little like, oh, I did do a good job with that. Get as many smiles as you can, because it looses the tension, it looses the anxiety, it builds the confidence. And so modeling positive self-talk and problem solving is really helpful.
That's a good tagline. Get as many smiles as you can.
I know.
I like it.
Yeah.
How can teachers begin to integrate executive functioning and social emotional learning into their classrooms without it feeling like one more thing?
Yeah. This is something that I do as often as I can when I get the opportunity to give professional development, because I've been an educator and a teacher for so many years that whenever I felt like someone was asking me to do more, it was almost like, okay, you have no idea how much I'm doing. I have, 100 students and they all learn differently. Now you're asking me to do something else. Oh my God. And so I'm super intentional about making sure that educators understand that it's not doing more, it's just how you're doing it. And it goes back to those little tweaks, and it goes back to the art of questioning. And so, and it also goes back to being explicit. So certain things like previewing steps before a task and talking out loud about what is our plan, and giving students time to make the plan. Not just saying, okay, go ahead and make a plan. Giving them time to actually figure out what their plan is. And another example I want to say is, a lot of educators will give things like graphic organizers, which is kind of a roadmap, if you will, for tasks that are difficult, like an essay, and it breaks things down. And so what happens is students love those, and educators love those, because it helps students actually, get little tasks done that are going towards a bigger task, like an essay. What happens is students can become super reliant on that. And so I think having these conversations of like, what is this graphic organizer doing? And how am I using it? And helping them, again, always internalize. You're always wanting students to have to think. Really be active learners and not passive. If you're talking, how do you know that they're listening and understanding? So unpacking why you're giving them what you're giving them. You're giving them a cheat sheet. Why? Oh, because cheat sheets help your brain remember things in small doses, and that will more likely lead to long-term memory. Like, why are you giving them a review, and how can they make their own review? And then the other thing I just want to mention, and again, I think this might be the most important part, because I talked about how empowering students to understand how they learn best is so important. So having reflective questions. I almost always employ educators to start or end teaching with questions.
Implore? Do you want
implore?
Yeah.
Oh, what did I say? Employ?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. So, okay, yeah.
Practice.
So I think, thank you for that. I think that educators, the most important thing that they can do is ask reflective questions in the start or the end of class. And this builds something we call an executive functioning metacognition, which is a fancy term for thinking about your thinking, being reflective. And sometimes teachers will say, I don't have time to make all these questions. And I say, keep it really simple in general. Maybe you're ending the day with, what's one thing that you really enjoyed learning today? What was one thing that was difficult about learning today, or the process? What did you enjoy doing? What did you find that was challenging? So then you're actually making them have to think about the day. What did I do what did I struggle with? And so embedding these really quick, and I'm talking like the bell's about to ring. We only have 2 minutes. Everyone, here's a Post-it. Go around the room and just write down one thing you really enjoyed. That is making them have to think. And then similarly, if you can start this session with an open-ended question, getting them to reflect about how they're learning. So it goes back to not doing more. It's just how you're doing it. If that makes sense.
Totally. Before we wrap up, if you could reframe one common misconception about learning or behavior, what would it be?
That's such a good question. I think one of the things I tend to talk about is that behavior is really, what we see is really a means of communication and really some lagging skill that is instead manifesting in what we're seeing. And so getting curious about, getting very curious and having a lot of empathy for when you see behaviors and asking and trying to get to the root of why the behavior is showing up. Why is their head down? Why are they calling out? Why are they running around the room? Why are they forgetting to turn in their homework? Coming from a place of curiosity and understanding behavior as a means of communication, I think will go a long way. And I think also in terms of the misconception, because I think that was really the question, is that struggling equals not trying. And so I think really reframing when you see a student that seems like they're struggling in some capacity, and whether it manifests in a behavior or not might mean that they're not trying or they don't know. And really, I think just understanding that maybe the way that we're instructing them is not how they learn best, and how we're assessing them is not how they show what they're learning best. So I can give you a couple little nuggets there, but they all feel super important in terms of misconception of how students learn.
Randall, it feels like we've come a long way since we connected initially in a Starbucks probably around a decade ago. You've shown a light on the importance of executive functioning and social emotional learning. You are helping parents shape more resilient and gritty children. And I know that this conversation is going to be enormously helpful to lots of parents out there and educators who are trying to learn how can they do better. And I thank you so much for coming on the program, on the podcast, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure, and I really appreciate it.
Same here. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Curious Incident, a podcast for special needs families. Don't forget to subscribe for a new episode every month. For more resources and helpful information, check out our website and blog at dayanlawfirm.com. This podcast provides general information which is not intended to and does not constitute legal advice. You should not rely on this information for any purpose. For legal counsel, you should consult with an attorney to discuss your specific circumstances. Your listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and the law offices of Adam Dayan, PLLC. No attorney-client relationship is established unless a retainer agreement has been executed between the client and the law offices of Adam Dayan. This podcast may constitute attorney advertising. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Any guests featured or resources mentioned on this podcast are for information purposes and are not endorsed by the law offices of Adam Dayan, PLLC.